Hannah Murray on TRE in the afternoon.
Joining us on the line now is Gill Whitty-Collins, who spent 26 years with Procter Gamble, latterly as Senior Vice President, running leading global brands such as Olay, Always and Pantene. She started to see gender equality issues at the top of the organisation and the impact on women and their career. Frustrated, she wrote Why Men Win at Work. Her latest book, The How to Win at Work book, is an empowering career guide for today's working women, drawing on her extensive experience as a leader, manager, workshop facilitator, coach and mentor to equip women to overcome the career barriers they face. Welcome to the show, Gill.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And what an amazing career it sounds like you've had, really climbing your way to the top.
Yeah, I had a very nice career for a very long time. No complaints at all. I went for over 20 years thinking that I was immune to the gender inequality issue. I was aware, obviously, that gender equality existed, that it was a problem, but I kind of felt invincible for a very long time there, and then got to the senior vice president level and realized that I was not, in fact, immune. And that, frankly, for any woman, whatever stage in your career, you hit the male dominant culture. And for some women, it's much, much earlier than it was for me. But when you hit it, my goodness, you hit it and you feel it, and you feel the impact on you, on your performance, on your ability to contribute, and to the women around you as well. But yes, it was a great career for a very long time.
So what started to change then? What did you notice?
So, the catalyst was that, reaching that level. I was in a company that was pretty good on this front. So, I believed it was for a long time. But once I hit that board and executive level, I was in meetings, found myself in meetings that were 80% plus men. And that really is a very different culture, that male dominant culture. It's not intentionally bad. I don't believe that these men are trying to negatively affect women, but, it definitely does. And I think it's I felt it, but more than anything, I could really see it impacting the women around me who were also in those meetings, because I knew those women outside those meetings, right? They were very different women in the male dominant culture. I could see it was, in terms of tangibly, there are the obvious things that everyone talks about, like women getting interrupted or not getting a word in edgeways or making their point and then, it being pretty much ignored and then coming back later as a genius idea from one of the men. I think every woman knows those. But I think for me, it was that real sense of, it was like, because these were good, decent men largely, right, that I worked with. These were not bad men. They listened very politely to the women, but it was really when the men started talking that the conversation really began and the engagement really, really began. And I just, slowly understood that was a culture, the male dominant culture. It favors men because they belong in it. They're comfortable in it. They can perform in it. They can be themselves in it. And it holds women back because they don't feel comfortable. They don't feel they belong. And there's that slight sense of, just being paralyzed from really, really performing at your best, I think, and not really focusing on your own strengths and what you do brilliantly, because you have that very, very human instinct to try to fit in to a dominant culture, which never works. It never, ever works. It never leads to success for anyone, I don't think.
It's amazing and shocking to me, I think, that still in this day and age, 90% of the leadership positions in the world are still held by men. I mean, that really is shocking, isn't it?
It really is. And, that was obviously what I learned quite quickly, because having found myself in this male dominant culture, I was actually quite fascinated by it because I didn't understand it at first. I do now. I didn't then. So I read a lot, and I read a lot of books and a lot of research. And I quickly realized, obviously, that data, I saw that data, and I realized it's not me. It's not this company. It's not these men. It's everywhere. And everywhere that I looked and read about and researched, every country, whether it was business or sport or politics, any walk of life and work whatsoever, the leadership was 90% men, less than 10% women. 5% of CEOs globally are women, even in this day and age. 9% of heads of state are women. It's tiny. And the media creates an impression of that women are equal and that we're taking over the world. I mean, it's nonsense. The data is so far from that. We are 50% of the population. We're 50% of the intelligence. I don't think anyone reasonable debates that women are as intelligent as men or as capable. And somehow that 50% turns into less than 10% of the leadership. So I found that really, really interesting. That's what really interested me, was why does that happen? Yeah. Why is that happening? And so I said, I'm going to write a book about this because this all needs to be, laid out and understood, because we'll never fix it until we understand it.
Yeah. So with the writing of, both books and all the research that you've done, have you been able to try and understand why it's happening and if the reality is that it could change anytime soon?
Yes, I mean that absolutely. As said, when I first sat in that male dominant culture boardroom, I didn't understand, but I really do now. I do now, after many years of thinking about this and researching this and talking about this. And the simple answer is that as I say, men win at work because we think they're better, so we keep choosing them for the big jobs. Right? That's, of course, the person who's giving the job chooses who they think is the best person. But the reality is that can't be true. That can't be right, because 50% of the world's population and intelligence are women. So in 50% of cases, we're right to choose the man, simplistically. But in the other 50% of cases, we should be choosing a woman. And so then you get into, okay, well, why does that happen then? Why is it that we believe that the man is the better performer, the better candidate, 9 times out of 10 or more, even when he isn't? Why are we so convinced? And that is a combination of many, many invisible forces and barriers, mostly unconscious, mostly unintentional, but which are combining in the world and in the workplace to absolutely convince us of that. And, in the books and in my keynotes and in my workshops, I talk about all of those in detail and how they work. But, you've got that invisible power of the culture helping the man, holding the woman back. You've got the men focusing on their strengths and the women less so because they're trying to fit in. You've got the men coming over authentically because they're able to just relax and be themselves, and the women not coming over authentically because they're desperately trying to work out how to survive in the culture. You've got the competence versus confidence equation. We value confidence. It's human. Women, we know that no matter how competent women are, they are generally less confident in their competence than men are. But we value the confidence. So we so often are persuaded to choose the man because he's projecting so more confidently. The umbrella theory I talk about a lot. We can talk about that, women much less savvy about the need to make themselves visible at work and make themselves known at work. Women believe that the work speaks for itself and that that's enough. And it isn't. The time gap, women are generally, if they have a family, they are doing 80% of the unpaid work at home for the family on top of their careers. They have anywhere between 3 to 4 hours a day less than a man because of that, because they're literally spending that time. And then also there's, frankly, men support their mini-me's coming up behind them. And far too often there isn't sisterhood at the top level, and women do not support younger women coming up. So lots and lots of invisible forces and barriers, and they're all combining to make us think, oh, the man's better then, we'll choose the man, when actually maybe he's just more comfortable in the culture, maybe he's just more confident in himself, maybe he's just more savvy about being visible and known, and you know what, maybe he's got more time. So yeah, I understand it now. I understand it now, and that's why I wrote the first book, because I felt it was really helpful to lay all that out. And women believe that. Women tell me, oh, I feel understood. I thought it was just me. You've given a language to what I've been feeling and been frustrated with. And, you know, men will say, because I very much wrote the first book for men as well, maybe even more so, they will say, you know, this is an epiphany for me. I never knew this. I never understood the gender inequality issue in this way. So I think it's really helpful to explore the why rather than just beating everybody up with the data, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And it is fascinating, just to pick up on something that you said there, how, and it's all to do with just kind of what's ingrained in us and how we're brought up in society in general, not by our parents necessarily, but how women have kind of always been brought up to compete against each other, whereas men are sort of brought up to support each other in the way that you said. The men are encouraging the younger men on the way up to the top, whereas the women not so much, which is awful.
Yeah, and you know, there's a whole theory about this, not my theory, that this goes back really to the beginning of society, right? And it goes back to, you know, it literally goes back to the biology of women seeking a mate and competing with each other for the mate, whereas the men being a little more liberal, maybe on that front. There is also, though, I think now you fast forward to the workplace, I think there's that scarcity mindset that comes into play. You know, if you think about it, you've got leadership, 90% men. Men know they're competing with each other, but they kind of accept that. And they're very, very used to competing with other men. Whereas if you're a woman who's made it to that top level, and only, you know, very, very few women do, there's that scarcity mindset of, I'm the only woman here. I'm the only woman in this room. I'm the only woman in this team. So if I give up, if I make room for another woman, then that will take space from me. Now, it's nonsense, because, and you know, what I always coach women on is, you know, in a career, it is a competition. Everybody is your competition, though. The women coming up are no more your competition than the men. You're just programmed to think that there's only room in this team for one or two women. And actually, really, there should be room in that team for half of it to be women, in which case there's no reason to make space for more like you.
Yeah, definitely. And what, with all your research then, have you come to any kind of conclusion, any advice on what women could do differently?
Yeah, absolutely. That's where the second book comes in. I mean, the first book very much, you know, it's Why Men Win at Work pulls together all of these invisible forces that cause this issue. And it does have a lot. Its final chapter is a whole to-do list for everybody, including men. And I am absolutely the last person who's going to dump the responsibility of this on women, right? Men have a ton of work that they need to do. And ultimately, this won't change without them, because they have 90% of the leadership of the world. That means that every decision that's ever made or influenced, you know, is them, basically. So I'm very careful not to say to women, okay, you know, you need to fix this. However, there are lots and lots of things that I think women can do. There are lots of things I think we can learn from. And that's why I wrote the How to Win at Work book. So that one, the second book, really, whilst the first book is very much for men and women, this one really is for women. And what I've done is pull together everything that I talk about in my keynotes and in my workshops, my retreats, the coaching that I do. And I've put it all in this book. So I've taken all of those forces that are working against us, and each chapter is, okay, here are the things you can do. Here are some exercises for you to do. So it really is a book that, women can actually coach themselves with. I just had somebody this morning wrote to me who said she read it this weekend. She read it cover to cover. She couldn't put it down. Nobody could, talk to her. And that's exactly, what it's for. I always say, I wish I could coach every woman on the planet through all of this, and I'm doing as many as I can, but it's all in here. For anyone who I don't get to coach, then everything that I know about how to overcome these barriers, these forces, and how to win at work, I've put it in the second book.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, if people want to get a copy of the How to Win at Work book, it's available on our website, tre.radio, and it's by Gill Whitty-Collins, who we've been chatting with today. Gill, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Lovely to talk with you.
And you. Bye-bye.